So today I'm going to be talking to you about books that I like to binge read, or series that I like to binge read. As you may know, I like to read fantasy books, and these are series that I either have already binge read or I wish that I had binge read and I didn't for whatever reason, which I'll explain as I go through. But I used to binge read a lot when I was younger, and then as I started getting older and started getting distracted by all the books that I wanted to read, I didn't binge read quite as much. So we'll get into all of that. The first one that I'm going to talk about, I did actually, I binge read the original trilogy, and then I didn't realise that it was actually a 9-book series, not a trilogy. So I binge read the original trilogy, and then when I found out it was a 9-book series, I reread that trilogy and then binge read the rest of them, and that is The Chronicles of Ixia by Maria V. Schneider. Book 1 being Poison Study, one of my favourite series of all time. I've spoken to you about it before. This one follows Yelena, who at the start of the story is in prison, and she is awaiting execution because she's committed a crime, although we don't know what it is when the story starts. And then she gets offered an alternative. She can avoid execution, but to do that she has to become the poison taster for the commander, which she may die from doing, but it's not certain death, so she goes with that option. There's lots of magic and intrigue, and the books are not super long, which is surprising for a fantasy epic, which is what this one is, and I strongly recommend, if you're going to pick this one up, to think about binge reading it, because it's super fast paced and it goes in a lot of different directions, and that makes it super fun. And the next one is a series that I didn't binge read because only the first 2 books in the trilogy were out when I first picked this up, and so I had to wait for the last book to come out, and the second book ends on a massive cliffhanger, hence why I highly recommend having all 3 books on hand. That is the Arc of the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman. This one you've probably heard of, is about a future of the human race where all forms of death have been eradicated, and now the only way that people die is by being killed by scythes, which leads to a lot of internal politics. And as I say, each book apart from the last book ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, so definitely one that you want to be able to dive straight into the next one. Similar story with this next trilogy, which I didn't binge read, but I did read them in pretty close proximity to each other, and that's the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson. This is a bit of a different one for me, and there aren't only fantasy on this list, but mostly there are. And this one follows, what's her name? Pippa, who is doing a project for secondary school, high school, and she's deciding to investigate the murder of a girl named Andy Bell, which happened several years ago and was pinned on her boyfriend of the time, who has since committed suicide. But Pip doesn't think that Sal Singh did it. And then each of the books in the trilogy is a different mystery story, but with Pip investigating it. They are super fast paced, pretty easy to read because they're YA, and they're just quite compulsive reads. So you don't necessarily need to binge read them because the only kind of link between the 3 is Pippa, but I feel like you'll want to. Next up, something that I actually binge read this year in January is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Lani Taylor. This one is pretty classic fantasy, quite tropey. I would still say that it's YA, but probably upper end of YA, and this one follows Karoo, who lives in the human world but helps a monster by being some kind of bounty hunter for him, and it's a little bit portal fantasy, it's a little bit angel fantasy, it's a little bit of a mixture. I'm not going to say too much about this because I've been doing live shows on Vish's channel. We've done the Dosab one already. We did the one for the second book, which is Days of Blood and Starlight, and the third one will hopefully be towards the end of April, so you can go and listen to us talk about those there. But I'm simply recommending this one because once I started this series I could not stop reading it, and I read the whole thing in about a week. A little bit of an older one for me is the Fire and Thorns series by Ray Carson. It's probably older in general as well, although some of these have been a bit on the older side. This one doesn't seem to have a publication page, so I don't know when it was published. Oh, there it is. 2011. Oh, it's newer than I thought. Anyway, this one is about Elisa, who is in an arranged marriage, which is pretty standard fantasy fare, but what's different about it is that she's actually excited about this arranged marriage. She actually wants to be in this arranged marriage. She wants to be important in this way because she's the younger princess, and so her sister is the one that is important in her family, and she's excited to become important herself. And also she's the bearer of the Godstone, which is a gem that lives in her navel and means that she's destined for greatness, but she doesn't really know what that means. And you kind of have to wait quite a while to figure out all of the threads of everything that's going on, and so that is why I think this one is pretty good for binge reading. Again, not too long. Again, it's YA and it reads pretty quickly. I'm going through these quite fast because there's quite a lot of them. Sorry. Next is a duology. It's called The Next Together by Lauren James. So it's only 2 books, so quick and easy. And this one, it's a bit difficult to describe because I don't want to accidentally spoil you, but it follows Catherine and Matthew, who essentially keep meeting each other at different points of time, and we're trying to figure out why it is that they keep bumping into each other. They're having all of these different lives and they're always intersecting with each other, and it's a romance, of course, and that is all I will say. But you don't really get the full scope of all of the answers that you want in this first book, and when I first read it I had to read the second one immediately. I just needed to know what was going to happen. Next, a series that I've spoken about tons on this channel, so I'm not going to spend too long on this. Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. This is a middle grade series, so it reads very quickly, very easily, and ultimately the main storyline is there are these 2 groups that are at odds with each other, and Sophie, our main character, is kind of caught in the middle, and she's trying to figure out what is going on along with her group of friends, and it's super, super fun. And yes, I know I tell you to read it all the time, but I'm not going to stop saying it until you actually do. Next up we have Warcross by Marie Lu. This one is a sci-fi, so a little bit different here. This one follows Amika. Yes, Amika, who is a hacker, and she has been hired to join in this game, this online computer game, and it's a competition, and I love a competition trope, and there's somebody who is trying to tear the game down from the inside, and Amika is hired by the game developer to track down this other hacker and stop them, and it's just so much fun. Competition trope, as I said, one of my all-time favourites. Very, very different kind of story to what I'm used to. I really liked the character of Amika, and again it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, so you kind of want to carry on, but also it is a duology, so just 2 books to get through. Next, another one I'm not going to spend much time on because you all know what it is. It's The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Not even going to bother telling you what it's about, you all know, but bingeable for sure. And also another one that I talk to you about all the time. You knew there was going to be Brandon Sanderson on this list. Mistborn. First Era. Now this one could potentially be a little bit intimidating in terms of binge reading because each book is like, what, over 600 pages? But they're just such, well, for me, they're such compulsive reads. They all lead on to each other. There's so many mysteries and so much foreshadowing and stuff to find out that you just want to keep reading. I did binge read this particular trilogy the first time I read it, and all the times I've reread it also. And do I need to tell you what this is about? No, I don't think so. Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerry Maniscalco is a quartet that I binge read last year, and I had no idea that I was going to fall so madly in love with this series, but I really did. It follows Audrey Rose, I think is her name. Yes, Audrey Rose and Thomas Cresswell, who are in, is it 1800s London, I think? Maybe 1600, I don't know. Either way, it's historical mystery, a little bit of fantasy maybe, you're not really sure. And they're investigating murders and mysteries, and it's super fun. I mean, to be honest, you read it for the romance between Audrey Rose and Thomas, but again, very compulsive. And finally, I also could not do a video without mentioning Sarah Beth Durst. So we have the Queens of Renthia series by Sarah Beth Durst, as I say. This one, again, adult fantasy this time, but pretty short. It's a trilogy, and although they don't end on cliffhangers, you do still want to know what's going to happen, and so it's good to have them on hand so that you can go straight into the next one. This first one follows, I'm so bad with names, what is her name? Delena, who really wants to be good at magic, but she's not really very good at magic, and she goes to magic school and she works really, really hard, but she's still not particularly great. And they live in this forest with basically killer spirits that just want to murder everyone, and the Queen is in charge of making sure that that doesn't happen. And Delena wants to become one of the prospective queens, because once a queen is done with her time being queen, she hands over the mantle to someone else. And even though Delena's not very good at magic, that is what she wants to do, because she once saved her family from the attack of the spirits. So, really interesting premise. I actually did, if you haven't seen it yet, I will link it for you, an author interview with Sarah Beth Durst, so do go and check that out. It was super, super fun, and she talks about where the inspiration for this particular trilogy came from, so highly recommend that. And that is it. That is a lot of recommendations for series that you can binge read if you are so inclined. Let me know if you like to binge read series, if you've read any of these and if you binge read them or wish you had. And let me know if there are any other series that you recommend binge reading. Have a nice chat down in the comments. And that's it for this one. Thank you so, so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.